The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
Good afternoon. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. I am your host, Drew Murray. I am here with my guest, RANIA Major, my friend RANIA Major. So RANIA, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Drew.
Thank you for coming on again. You've already been on once. You came on, God, was it probably 6 months or maybe even 9 months ago to discuss COVID-19 and prisons and the dangers of the people in prison and COVID-19. So we had a good discussion there. But now you're coming on for a different reason. You were running for municipal court.
Yes.
You got your petitions. You got all the numbers that you needed. You put in petitions, but then something happened. So why don't you kind of go into and first even maybe. Not everyone knows what petitions even are. People have no clue what is involved when you're running for office and whether you're running for city council or, in your case, for a judge. So why don't you even describe that process? Because maybe a lot of our listeners don't understand that.
Sure. So initially, to get on any ballot, you need to get petitions signed. So what that is literally a piece of paper that says the name of the candidate, the party they're running for, the position they're running for, and whether it's the primary or whether it's the election, the general election. Then what happens is we have to get people to sign their name, print their name, now it's registered address only, the city or town they're from, and the date. So what happens is, depending upon the actual office, each candidate or different candidates need different amounts. To run for judge, you need 1,000 good signatures and lines. Otherwise, people can issue a challenge.
And that's you ran at a municipal level. So all of those signatures have to come from the county of Philadelphia.
Correct, because I'm Philadelphia and they were on Democrat, so they had to be registered Democrats in Philadelphia.
And the interesting about it running for judge, you could theoretically even crossfile. So, like as someone running for city council, you could only run as a Republican or a Democrat. But as a judge, you could crossfile. You could run as both.
That's exactly right, because judges are supposed to be neutral. Once you get robed, you don't have a party. It's not like you ask people when they come in the courtroom, which party are they? So that's why judges can go on both sides.
And do the circulators, and I actually don't know this because the law did change with Act 77. So, for example, when I ran for state rep back in the day, my circulators, meaning the people going out and getting these signatures, had to be from my party, the Republican Party, and they had to live in the 182nd legislative district. Now, the law changed, so any Republican in the state of Pennsylvania could circulate for me. How does it work for Judge Ken? Does it have to be someone who lives in the city of Philadelphia or in the county?
It does for certain judges, but not for others.
Okay.
So for a local judge, whether it's Philadelphia, whether it's common pleas or a municipal court, or if it's in, Montgomery County, it has to be from the county. Even though it's technically a state position, you're running to be a judge within your county. For a state position like you ran for, then it's statewide.
Sure.
So it's a little bit different.
Or even if it's Superior Court, Commonwealth Court.
Correct. The higher courts are statewide positions. So even though someone might be coming out of Philadelphia or coming out of Pittsburgh, they're running across the state.
Sure. So we were talking beforehand. You were running for common pleas and municipal? Is that?
Yes. Initially, what you do, although it kind of changed a little bit for some people this year, is you typically sign up for both courts.
Okay.
So you get petitions for common pleas and for municipal court, and generally The Democratic Party, for example, waits until after we pick our ballot positions to determine who they're endorsing. So someone who's not endorsed by the city committee, such as myself, I was entitled to do both. They made a new rule this year that they did endorsements before petitions even came out, and they told each person what they were endorsing them for. So they said, you're going to be common pleas, you're going to be municipal court, and you cannot cross-file. And if you do cross-file, then you're going to lose your endorsement. So, for example, there's a currently sitting common pleas judge who was appointed, who they endorsed for municipal court position. So he could only do municipal court.
Okay. So how many of each did they endorse? So you said they endorsed both on the common pleas and
right. 8 positions are available for common pleas as of right now, 3 for municipal.
Okay. And so that was the number that they endorsed. Now I'm curious, what if someone didn't get the required signature, but literally didn't only got 950 and they were endorsed? What were they gonna?
Okay.
What was their plan there?
Then they're automatically out of the box.
Yeah. That's kind of, it's interesting that they would do that prior to, but like we do that on the Republican side because we need a lot more help getting signatures because it's there's not as many Republicans. So when you're knocking on doors, you need those ward leaders, you need the committee people out helping you knock on all those doors to get those signatures. So you needed 1,000 for both.
Correct.
Please and municipal. So how many did you end up getting?
On municipal court side, it was something like 1583, I think it was final. I had more on the CP side because a lot of people do not want to sign 2 petitions at once, which is basically what judges are asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, it worked a little differently this year, Drew, because of COVID. So there was another stipulation in there. Non-endorsed city committee candidates were not permitted to go to any ward event where they would have an opportunity to have their petition circulated. Some wards may have had actual petition signing parties, or they may just had an organizational meeting during that time where people walked in petitions for all the committee people to sign. But since I was out of that loop, I can't speak to exactly how it worked for all of that. And the second thing is, because of COVID, door knocking didn't really work. So that made it even more difficult for the non-endorsed candidates to try to come up with, you don't just get 1,000 signatures, you try to get as many as you can in case of a challenge like this. And as you know, I've run before and I've usually gotten like 3,000 signatures. So that way there's not going to be a challenge. But it was very, very difficult in COVID.
If a person has never gotten signatures before, they don't realize how incredibly difficult it is. 1,000 signatures, or 1,500 in your case, seems like you could get it in a couple days. It is extremely challenging, and especially if you're saying that you couldn't go to the signature parties. I mean, that's where, even on the Republican side, you would normally come out of those signature parties with, God, on the Republican side, you would, if you came out with 100, that was great. On the Democrat side, I assume you're coming out with 300. So
you don't come out with 300, but you come out with all solid signatures because they're all committee people, as you know.
Yes, they know how to sign. Because that's another thing. I mean, if someone puts the wrong date in the middle of your petition, that could mess up your entire petition.
Or if they handwrite their name where they're supposed to sign it and vice versa, those are what the challenges are about.
And the signature box is first, which I always thought was stupid because most people print and then sign. And yes, I can't tell you how many people that sign and then print, and then it's not intuitive. It's really challenging. And depending on the petition, you would think petitions are all the same because they're collecting the same data. But I know, when I ran for city council versus when I ran for state rep, they were 2 completely different petitions.
Wow.
It was no, I mean they look similar. Now, did you have to get? You didn't have to get them notarized, did you? Did they?
No, they did away with the notary requirement. Anyway, I think it happened actually pre-COVID.
I don't know if that was covered under Act 77. You might be right, but I thought it was more a COVID. No, you know what? I think you're right, because it was. I think when I got signatures last year, it was pre-COVID, and you're right. I think they got rid of that requirement, which was great. It just like one more step that was so challenging.
Right. You have to do a candidate's affidavit now, an extra affidavit.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But it's not as bad. So you got your signatures, and it's interesting. I would have thought, like I'm always judging on my own experience. 1,500. When you need 1,000, 1,500 was like that was the golden number. Obviously, more is better, or I should say, 50% more was always what I was told is what you want. So, city council for me was 1,000 2 years ago. So I went. My goal was 1,500, and then last year with state rep it was 300, and my goal was 450, and I barely got both. I mean, it was down to the wire on both. So. What happened? So you got your signatures. You thought you were good, but what happened from there?
Well, so then what happened was actually on St. Patty's Day we picked our numbers, and on St. Patty's Day I also got served with objections to my petitions. And doing objections, understand, is a very tedious process, because it means that somebody is going through every one of your petition signature lines, okay? And they're checking it in a system. Most people use VAN, which is the Voter Action Network, but they're really supposed to use the SURE system, which is actually the National Voter Database. And there are issues with both. There were issues with both a lot this year because of the mail problem. Mm-hmm. So with people moving around and shifting in COVID, even assuming that they thought to change their registered address, which they may not have and most likely didn't because they were worried about survival, or taking care of their loved ones who maybe lost a caretaker because the caretaker had to take care of their own family or their own children or whatever. So with the mail system being behind too, that didn't aid in the process.
And so when someone challenges you, just to kind of give background, well, number one, I don't know if I said that you're a Democrat. So you're, yes. Even though you're on my show, I forget if I said that you were a Democrat running for judge. So for example, and give people background, let's say you had 1,500 signatures and you're challenged. The person challenging you wants to find 501 signatures where there's something wrong. And that something wrong could be, as we talked about, an incorrect date. Someone could flip where they signed versus where they printed. Something that always happens, at least in remember when I did it, you'd write the zip code where the date's supposed to be.
Right.
Because you're writing Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, depending on the petition. And then what is natural that would come next is 19103, your zip code. So I know that happened a lot. Those are all things that are very small technicalities that honestly, in my opinion, to not discount signature. But that's what someone's looking for. And it is tedious. It is line by line, not only looking to make sure everything is in the correct box, but if it's in the correct box, then you have to cross-reference the list that you had referred to make sure that person, number one, in your case is a Democrat.
Right.
Is a resident of the city of Philadelphia. And as you'll explain even more, the address listed is the address where they are actually registered. Maybe not necessarily where they live. Oftentimes it is, you should have both, but when you move within a city, who changes their registration? Because you can still, who remembers to do so? Maybe at the last minute they remember because they got to go to a new division in the polling place. But that is something that is oftentimes forgotten. So we're going to go into that in 1 minute. We're going to take a very quick break. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone.
The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. I am your host, Drew Murray, and I'm here with my friend RANIA Major. And right before the break, we were kind of explaining the petition process, the challenge process, and then one thing that I would add, only, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, RANIA, only a Democrat can challenge you. Now, most people would think only a candidate can challenge you. Like most people would say, okay, another judge must have challenged you. But that's not the case. Any Democrat, and in this case, the city of Philadelphia, can challenge your petitions. So,
right.
Yeah. So what happened in your case? Did you were challenged? Were you challenged? You challenged on both sets of petitions?
I was challenged on both sets of petitions. A challenge entails two things, basically. It includes an actual physical petition, which is a legal pleading. It says, RANIA Major is running for municipal court. RANIA Major submitted petitions. She has X amount of these types of, alleged errors and those amount of other alleged errors. And then the second thing they have to do, Drew, and I don't know if you can see it, but these are literally some of the spreadsheets. And if you look at how small these spreadsheets were that I got, even with the magnifying glass, it was really, really hard to read. So they then have to do spreadsheets by line and page number and say for each person that they are objecting to, or each elector whose signature or information they were objecting to, what the specific objection is, or in this case was.
And how many did they find that they thought, or they were claiming, were incorrect or invalid, or something was wrong with it, even a technical?
Out of 1,582 on the municipal court side, they said that they were objecting to 1,005. Okay. In actuality, they objected to 997. But basically, they're saying that the whole thing is a ball of wax and needs to get thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Was that on just one of the sides? On one of the
that was
races?
That was the MC side. On the CP side, here's what happened. That morning, we picked our ballot positions. So there are 8 positions available on the Court of Common Pleas, and I drew number 10, I believe it was, but number 10 actually put me into the 7th position, because some numbers, they put extra numbers into the bag or the box, and they may not fill up. So I moved up to position 7. On the municipal court side, there are 3 positions available, and I pulled number 2. So because that's a better ballot position for me, that's the court that I wanted to stay on the ballot for. At the moment, at this point in the story going forward, I'm still doing both. So we're checking petition challenges to both.
And that's a question I don't know. When do you need to make that decision? Like when do you have to say, okay, it's either common pleas or municipal court? Is that
you don't have to.
You can be on the ballot for both.
You can take it all the way through. Even in the past, there's been one candidate who luckily is on the bench now, but at one point she kept her name on both sides because she had good positions. She had 2 and 3, I believe it was, but I don't remember which was 2 and which was 3 of MCCP. And so it got a little bit confusing that year.
Okay. And so, and another thing we should probably explain, people say, well, how do you do ballot position? Did you pull out of the coffee cup?
They've changed it. We now had a box this year. I think so that our hands would be more socially distanced, and we had to go ahead and put, antiseptic on and/or gloves when we pulled out of the box.
Interesting. So, and that is a crazy thing to begin with as well. The fact that a lot of people, like my friend Christian DeChico, never pulled a good ballot position. So he ran, I think, 3 times, maybe 2. And he dropped out every time because he didn't get a good ballot position, which is crazy on its own. That's crazy that our judges and all elected officials can be made or broken by the number they pull out of what used to be a coffee can now a box.
Right. And I have pulled
that-
out of the coffee can.
Yeah.
In the past. Christian has too, and in fact, Christian got challenged this time too.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So it's that's another story. We didn't even talk about that a little bit, how that process should change. I mean, I know for me personally, there was 8 people running in the primary for city council. I picked 7. I mean, it was almost automatic. And the election, it literally went one. It almost went right in a row. You know, I came in 7th out of 8, and I was the 7th person on that ballot. And it's a crazy process that I think they can change. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But so you were challenged. So
Yeah.
who challenged you? Was it another judge? Was it
Interesting. No. Well, I don't know. I have suspicions. I can tell you who actually challenged me. There were 6, I think it was 6 people that in total that were challenged this time. 5 of the 6, not me, okay, I was the exclusion, were challenged by Democratic City Committee directly through Lou Ager, who is both a ward leader and a lawyer. So he filed those, being the lawyer for City Committee for the Democratic Party of Philadelphia, and they had a couple of people named as the plaintiffs who also are active in City Committee. On my side, on my petition I found out was actually done by another ward leader, and Timothy Savage, and no idea why. Timothy Savage, from what we were told, supposedly had a candidate before that didn't win or got booted off because of a challenge, and therefore he has a chip on his shoulders, but nobody's been able to come up with a name for that purported person. Vince Melcuri, the last time, got number 1. He got challenged, and it was also by Savage. So Savage used a real attorney who only does election law initially, as opposed to a ward leader who does another full-time job besides being a lawyer. And he used 2 people, Mr. and Mrs. Timothy Brooks. And the interesting thing about the whole thing was Mr. Timothy Brooks wasn't even registered at the address that he was supposed to have lived at. Okay, so he's basically, they're straw plaintiffs, and Mr. Brooks really doesn't have any standing to challenge me, although we wind up agreeing, as you'll hear in the saga, that Mrs. Brooks was named at the proper address, and she was properly registered as a Democrat. So can I tell you who exactly did it? No. Can I tell you exactly why they did it? I had to be blocking somebody's candidate. So
Mrs. Brooks was the official name on the challenge.
Mr. and Mrs. Timothy Brooks.
Okay. So and the ward leader was
Timothy Savage.
Now, was he also on the challenge?
No.
Or he was not listed on the challenge, but he coordinated it? Is that?
He was the one that put together the petitions and the challenge.
Okay. And as you know, they hired an attorney.
Right.
This is not an easy process. This is not something that you can just, that took an hour. I mean, this is hours worth of work for an attorney. So it has to cost, you're an attorney, I'm assuming thousands of dollars?
Well, if you're here's the problem with it. If you're the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, whomever you are that you want to challenge people, maybe another candidate wants to do it, you have to have a lot of people to do it. Because what you do is you split the pages up. When there are 35 signatures per page, then you're talking about a lot of pages to comprise 1,500, 1,600, whatever the number may be, of signatures of electors. So the people divide the pages up, and that's how they can do it quickly. So if you're a private candidate who doesn't have an endorsement or doesn't have that kind of machine behind you, you virtually have no chance, realistically, unless you want to spend a lot of money, of challenging somebody else. So it's in my opinion, a control mechanism.
Well, but it does cost money. Meaning Mrs.
Not
Brooks.
they get volunteers.
Yeah.
It costs them for the attorney, I would assume, but for everything else, it doesn't.
But you weren't challenged by the city committee. You were maybe. So you're saying maybe?
I don't know. Savage is a word here, and I've been told it wasn't them, but you can only see how far a stone can get thrown.
Well, I guess my question would be, why would a private citizen who probably doesn't know you, honestly, let's be honest, most people don't even know what judges do when they're voting for them. I mean, if you asked a person on the street the difference between the Superior Court and the Commonwealth Court, they would have no idea they'd say, I have no idea.
Agreed.
Or common pleas, or municipal versus common pleas. So why would someone with no skin in the game challenge someone that they don't know? I mean, when I ran and I had 1,500, of course you're nervous that you're going to get challenged. And I was ready, to challenge back. If I was challenged, then I would have challenged back. That's just kind of the way it works, at least in city council. I was expecting it would be either a candidate or someone doing it for a candidate, and why else would you do it? So in other words, the person who did this was doing it for another candidate, right?
No doubt. Well, that, or it could have been, it could be across the board too. I mean, out of all the candidates that got challenged, I'm the only one that actually did city committee work. With the exception of Sherry Cohen. When Sherry ran for city council, she did some city committee work, but she's never done any city committee work to become a judge. Sure. Okay. And what that basically means is I'm doing pro bono cases for them. And I've done them hard, since 2013, all types of cases, and won every single one of them, and would send them a letter saying Mr. or Mrs. Smith's case is successfully closed, without telling them necessarily what successfully meant, but they should know because they referred the type of case. And
you did it pro bono, and it's as simple as you paid your dues to the city committee.
Right.
In the hope of they would endorse you in the future, or at least not challenge your petitions.
Right, exactly. And that way you also get to know them. They get to know you. They get to know your heart, your brain, that type of situation.
And the city committee, that's another thing we should probably explain. There's a Democrat city committee, there's a Republican city committee. And what both those committees are made of are the ward leaders and then the committee people. So there's 66 wards, and then each one of those wards has 20-some divisions, maybe sometimes 30. And each one of those divisions has committee people. And one of the reasons you want to be endorsed are so you have boots on the ground on election day for election day operations. And for most people, when you walk into a division and you're handed a ballot, that is normally a committee person, and you want to be on that endorsed ballot. So what was the challenge? And was there one specific? They obviously had to find at least 500, and I keep saying 501 because I'm using the 1,500 number. What was the main challenge, or what was the issue with? Or was there one issue that was prevalent in most of the challenge signatures? Well,
let me tell you what the challenges are. One is that somebody's not registered at all. One is called NRA, which is not registered at the address. Then there's not a registered Democrat. So in my instance, maybe if a Republican signed, they get tossed off because they're not a Democrat. There are handwriting different in another. They objected to circulators not putting their registered address, but that law changed. They put maybe something illegible. Sometimes, some people have messy handwriting and you can't totally read it, so you can't figure out if they are or are not a voter. Hand of another is where somebody else, sometimes you see somebody, they call it kitchen table petition. So somebody writes a bunch of people down. That's what happened to Mel Curie, apparently, whomever he had hired last time. They did kitchen table stuff. Or maybe you have 4 people in the same household. And here's the interesting dichotomy. Some people maybe sign and print their own name, but one person writes all the addresses.
Yes.
Okay, so then you have an interesting mix. So the majority of mine, wound up stipulating to everything. I hired David Senoff, who is just a brilliant, he's probably the #1 election lawyer in the city. And he was actually appointed to the disciplinary board that oversees lawyers by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that's currently sitting. So that'll come into play and be an interesting saga later on. So it really came down to 213 or 218 of the NRAs for me. And the other side, the challengers, agreed that I had 213 Democratic voters who were all residents of Philadelphia. We were fighting about the issue with the address.
With the address. Okay. So we're gonna take a real quick break, and then we're gonna come back and go over what sounds like the NRA was the big issue. So you're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. We'll be back in a minute.
The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
Welcome back. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. I'm your host, Drew Murray, and I'm here with my friend RANIA Major talking about the challenges to her petition. So right before break, RANIA, you were talking about, the 216 signatures that were being challenged because of, I guess, not a registered address. So what does that mean, and
Okay.
what went on from there? Because I know I could probably give it to you now for the rest of the show, and you could explain what happened, because I've talked to you about it a few times.
Okay. So in simple terms, in 2016, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court en banc, which means all of the justices, wrote 2 opinions. The first one was Varga, and about a month later came an opinion called Morley. And what these 2 did is they took away the challenge based upon not registered address. So what happened was the court said that it's of no consequence what your address is that you put on a petition, because what really matters is that it's a valid signature of an elector for the party for whom they're signing the petition, and within the area that they're signing the petition for. So the issue was between registered address versus residential address. So, for example, let's take someone who's older, and maybe they originally registered at 1234 Oak Street, and now they're living at 456 Main Street, and they write down the Main Street address. So the challenge was not that they weren't a Democrat, not that they weren't registered, not that they didn't live in Philadelphia, just that they put an old address. Well, maybe that person's disabled, and when somebody asks them to please put your registered address, they don't understand the difference between registered and residence. Maybe it's somebody who is older and has moved around a lot and doesn't necessarily remember what address they originally registered at. Okay. Maybe it's somebody for whom English is not their primary language, if a language for them at all. So they don't really understand the difference between residence and registered. Maybe they've moved around. Then on top of that, you add COVID to the problem. So you add COVID, where we've had so many people that lost their jobs and out of necessity and survival moved in with other people. Some got illegally kicked out of their apartments, maybe despite the moratorium on that by their landlords. Some people, again, like I said earlier, maybe they have a loved one who needs care, and that person lost their caretaker because they had their own thing to take care of now. So now these people have all moved, and they're not thinking about probably even changing their driver's license address, let alone their voter registration address. And then on top of that, you add the problems that we've had with mail. So, we asked the court to actually take judicial notice of what a mess the post office has been, and particularly in Philadelphia, it's been a mess for months. I got a Christmas card that was postmarked December 15th, sometime in February. So even if somebody did think to register a new address, it may have not even gotten there yet and gotten put into the system. And then that's the other issue. Voter registration and whomever puts all this stuff into the systems wasn't open full time because of COVID. So if they got a lot, because remember, we had a big election last year and a lot of people were changing parties. A lot of people were signing up to vote for the same, for the first time, whatever everybody was doing. And so all of that data has to go into the system and be put in. So who knows? And when you look at Van, which most people have access to, you can go down to Spring Garden Street and Columbus Boulevard and Spring Garden, and they use Van. Okay, so that's where you look to see, is that Drew Murray's signature? Is that Rania Major's signature? Is that her address? But that one's not even as up to date as Sure. That's why the courts say you're supposed to use Sure, and even Sure for Drew Murray could show 5 different addresses. Okay, so where's the equity in that, and how do you know which one's the current registered address, right?
The data is not, as you said, the data is not correct. You would think that the voter registration rolls are perfect. They are far from it.
No, because it's data entry by a person, and we aren't perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. So in any event, so Varga and Morley say that it's of no consequence what address comes along. So what happens in 2019, the state legislature, the Senate proposes it, and it goes back and forth between the two houses, between the House and the Senate, until the House's version of amendments to Act 77 passes in the House. And my understanding is that the Democrats, who were then sitting in the House of Reps, unanimously voted for these 2 changes. The provisions are back to back. So the first provision concerns who can sign a petition and what the requirements are. So they changed that from residential to registered. So now it makes it sort of overruled, but without saying it in the legislative history, but Varga and Morley. The next provision concerned the circulators, like you spoke about earlier. So at the time of Varga and Morley, you could be a circulator and you had to put your registered address. Otherwise, your petition could be tossed because your circulator put the wrong address. And if people don't know, the circulator is the one who's out there helping you get petitions signed, because you don't do them all by yourself. It's impossible.
And if that address is wrong, if the circulator puts his wrong address, that's 30 signatures.
All of them get
all of them gone.
Correct. So when they change Act 77 in 2019, they changed the circulator. So the circulator doesn't have to be there registered. They can now put their residential address. So a lot of mine were circulator objections too, but they conceded the law change and that was wrong. Okay. There's, for example, the thing about the date, as long as you can show, sometimes people leave blanks on the date. So let's say somebody signed lines 1 through 4, 5 forgets to put the date, but 6, 7, and 8 then write the date. Okay. If you can show that that person signed in between correct dates, because we only have a small amount of time to try to get petitions signed, then it counts. If it's like at the bottom of your petition, it's the last signature, it may not count because you can't say it was done before or after the deadline date. So what happens in my case is we decided it became an all or nothing. It came down to 213 signatures, and it came down to only the NRAs not registered at the address. So it's whether McSorley should control and Varga, or Morley, and Varga, or if it should be the legislature. So,
and this is the petition itself, not the petition signer, not the circulator.
This is the signers.
This is the
Okay, these are the signers. So the electors, if the electors sign and put their current address, but it's not where they were registered, then they were being challenged as a signer, even if they're registered Democrat and even if they're still living in Philadelphia. So we go to court, to Commonwealth Court. You don't go to a regular level court. It goes right away to the intermediate appellate court because it's an election case. And we argue the case. My attorney David Senoff wrote a brilliant brief. We put all of the issues in, how it results in voter suppression. He quotes from Morley and Varga, and Morley and Varga were based upon a public policy consideration. Because for voting purposes, you want it to be more inclusive, not less inclusive. And that's why they said, who cares what address you put down, as long as that person signed it, it's their valid signature, they're from the party signing it, and they're from the place that they're signing a petition for. That's really all that counts, and that it's done on time, right? Within the time period. So the judge basically says there's oral argument, and he issues this decision that must have been prepared ahead of time because it came down so fast it was crazy. And he basically says that it's not his position to rule on the merits of legislation, and that the legislation, he seems to think that it makes it more clear, and it's really an issue for the Supreme Court. Now, my case was the first one at that level in the petition process. So the other candidates were either behind me, or I understand it was two. I know for a fact it was one of them, but I understand there were two where there was a deadline that was missed by the challenger, by city committee's attorneys. And because they missed filing something, those challenges automatically got thrown out by Commonwealth Court. So those people are still on the ballot. So my issue goes up to the Supreme Court first.
Now, and also so people know, Commonwealth Court, they handle appeals that have to do with the government, and in this case, it's election law. One good question I forgot to ask you this: you said you pulled your ballot spot. And I'm going by memory here. I would have thought the challenge had to go in before you pulled your ballot. Were they behind this year? Or are they?
No. Here's how it works, Drew. They put the challenges in before we picked our spots. I think then they decided which ones to actually serve and move forward on once we picked our spots.
So the fact that you got a good position is why, it's almost like they were ready to go and they were waiting to see.
Oh, they were ready to go. I got back from Harrisburg that day. I rode back with one of the other candidates, and they had already been at my house and served. And I don't even want to get into what happened when they came to my house and went to my office. And I gave it to the process server in the manner they did it, and on my disabled mother who's wheelchair bound. And
they had to serve you directly, right? They have to put it in your hand.
Well, technically, they have to serve the person in charge of the house, and my mother isn't. Okay, it's my home, and I moved her in here in October, on October 23rd, and her caretaker was with her. And then they went and pounded on my office door and wanted to serve it on my secretary / paralegal / office manager. And she said she can't accept it. But because of the manner they were doing it, she thought they were going to break the door down, and were pounding so hard it scared her, because I'm at 5th in Indiana. We're where all the shootings and all kinds of crazy stuff, robberies happen all the time. And she was in there that day by herself. So my receptionist had lost her brother-in-law, and I was in Harrisburg picking a number. So I just said, I'll accept service. Leave us alone. Leave my secretary alone. I called the attorney. I said, this is crazy. The filing service said, well, that has to be how the attorney told us to do it. And the attorney said, well, I didn't tell them to do that. And mind you, this is a service that I also use. So I know the owner.
So you picked your number, and this is totally out of it. You picked your ballot in Harrisburg? even though it's a municipal election?
I picked my ballot number, both ballot numbers, at about 11:30 that morning. And by the time I got back here around 2-ish, 2:30-ish, I had already been served with the objections.
All right. So we're going to take
the other challenged people.
So we're going to take one quick break. Then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end to finish the, what I'll call the appeals process that you brought all the way to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone.
The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
Welcome back. You're listening to USALA Media in the Republican Zone. I am here with my friend RANIA Major, and so we have 10 more minutes. We're going to talk about the appeal that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. And I also want to just get into, now you said you weren't challenged by the city committee, at least not direct.
Well, they're saying they're not.
I want to get into why city committee is even challenging. I mean, I don't think that's their job, and it sounds like they do it a lot, and maybe the Republican City Committee did it in years past as well. But I think in my opinion, that's just trying to control an election and not allowing the voters to decide who wins these elections. So, which
is exactly why it's voter suppression.
Yeah,
and the Supreme Court, by the way, sanctioned it because they said that Varga and Morley are no longer controlling. They disregarded the public policy reasons behind the Voter Rights Act, and Act 77, which is Pennsylvania's voting, election laws. They totally disregarded all of it. We even filed a reconsideration because they claimed in the opinion that was written by Philadelphia's own Kevin Doherty, claimed that we didn't preserve all our issues below. They made a decision without even seeing the transcript, because it hadn't been typed yet, from the Commonwealth Court.
So the Commonwealth decision was not, the opinion they were never able to read the Commonwealth decision.
No, the opinion was out. The judge's opinion was out, but the oral argument gets transcribed, and that wasn't ready. So they couldn't see what was discussed at oral argument, because you have to preserve it either in writing in your brief or at oral argument. They never even saw that.
Is that atypical in an appeal?
Absolutely. What decision is made by a court without reviewing the record below in toto?
Sure. They only saw the opinion of the...
And that's the most disheartening thing to me about this whole thing, because I had more faith in our justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court than to think they were going to play tiddlywinks.
And I would so they only read the opinion of the Commonwealth Court judge without reading the arguments that you and the challenger made to that judge.
Correct. They didn't have the oral argument transcript.
And why didn't they?
It wasn't prepared yet. It wasn't ready. The challenger orders the court reporter. The court reporter was someone from New York that nobody's ever heard of, including my lawyer, who does elections for half of everybody, and who got half of the justices who made the decision on the bench. And they also put him on the disciplinary board. And then they write a scathing opinion that we couldn't decide whether it was directed to him or directed to me, because they knew I had an attorney, but they kept saying the candidate says this or the candidate fails to say that. And, didn't preserve this issue, but we did. And going back to your question earlier, it's total control. They challenged number one on the CP ballot. Okay, Caroline Turner, and she's a great lady. Vote for her if you can. Caroline made it through because she was one of the ones that they filed something in an untimely manner. Terry Booker's number two. Terry Booker just finished her challenge in the last couple weeks or so and just came out, really campaigning because they were blocking the Democratic endorsed. So then you start with the Democratic endorsed in the third position. and I have nothing against that person. But the problem is this is how you control who's on a ballot. If you look on the MC ballot, there are now 4 people for 3 spots. And one of them is pretty much an unknown. Okay. And Sherry Cohen had the exact same issues as me, but she was behind me in the time process of when her case was working through the system. So she was in her appeal process from Commonwealth Court when we were waiting for the Supreme Court decision to see if she should get knocked out or not. Mind you, I had to pay for an attorney to take on the challenge. And I didn't know when I was campaigning what I should do as far as, do I campaign? Do I not campaign? Until there's a decision. It's horrific. And now we have a law in Pennsylvania for every single candidate. When you run for office again, if somebody else runs for an office, every single one of you is now subject to that. And out the window goes the public policy reasons for encouraging more people who speak different languages, people that are disabled, people that are elderly, people that just don't understand. Maybe they're even illiterate. And we have plenty of those in Philadelphia because our school system's awful. And it's going to prevent them.
So how many people, there are 3 positions open for common pleas? Is that what you said?
For municipal court.
Municipal. Okay. So how many people are left on that ballot?
4.
4.
3 are endorsed by the city committee.
Okay. And then there's 8 for common.
There are 8 spots on common pleas, and I'm not positive how many people are left on the common pleas ballot, but just thinking who I know that's on it that wasn't endorsed, I think it's maybe, at best, it might be 12, but I think it's less than that.
So in other words, I guess, what I look at is, in many ways, the city committee has somewhat made the decision on who to vote for a lot of these voters, because there aren't many people there. There aren't
Absolutely.
many people on that ballot, which, and I've said that before. I have friends who have run for judge, and what they say you hope for is the call from Brady. If you get the call, and he's either doing one or 2 things, and I think this should be illegal: stay on the ballot, or do me a favor, jump off. We'll get you next time. I mean, I've heard many people say, and I don't need you to say anything on that, because I don't want to get anyone in trouble, especially if you are still a Democrat, and I'm sure you still want to run. But I've always thought that phone call was ridiculous and unfair, because what is happening then is city committee, and this happens all over. It's not just the city of Philadelphia. It's not just Democrats. It happens on both sides of the aisle.
Well, it happens better here than most places.
Yes, no, yeah, Philadelphia has mastered it, that's for sure. But the decision on who wins a lot of these elections are made not by the voters, but they're made by city committee, and in Philadelphia's case, by the head of city committee, which is still Bob Brady. And I don't think that's not how elections are supposed to work.
No, the people are supposed to get to choose, and it's just like, I just got a mailer this week that has all the city committee endorsed candidates that's claiming that they're all progressive Democrats. And I can tell you, if there are 3 progressive Democrats on there, I would be surprised. There's definitely 1, maybe 2, arguably 3, and the rest are not progressives, but they are Democrats.
They're more moderate, or?
They're more moderate. I practice in front of some of these people. I've run with these people, some of them before. And when you campaign, you can say anything. I can say that I'm able to fly. So I'm the flying candidate or the flying nun, right? But it doesn't mean it's true.
Well, selfishly, I prefer the moderate Democrats because I'm a Republican. And I'm actually a very moderate person myself. But it seems that anyone who runs now is a Democrat. They have to say the word progressive. And if they don't say progressive, then, as you can tell, then maybe you're not going to be endorsed. So it is it's absolutely a crazy process. And I know you. I've gotten to know you. When I get to know people, I talk to people and say, "What do you think about RANIA? She's running for this, she's running for that." I've always heard very good things about you. And even though you're not a Republican, maybe we'll bring you over to our side. if you get sick enough over there of what goes on, not that there's not issues on both sides of the aisle. Maybe we'll convince you to be a Republican soon.
Yeah, well, don't hold your breath on that one, Drew. But the Republicans play ball in this city with the Democrats too. I have a friend that was made one of those promises that never got him.
Yep. I think I know who you were talking about. A good friend who previously ran for district attorney in Philadelphia. Our friend Beth Grossman. And I remember when that happened, when she was asked to step down. Many of us were very upset. Beth would be an incredible judge. You would be an incredible district attorney, but that's a different story. Looks like we are at the end. I want to thank you for coming on and explaining this kind of really detailed process and how crazy it is, and how unfortunately sometimes people are on the ballot or even win elections, or lose elections, not because of what the voters want, but because of what politicians and connected people will say want. So thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Drew. Thanks for putting the issue out there. It's an important issue.
And we'll have you come on again. Thanks, everyone, for listening. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. Have a great afternoon.
The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.